Mr. President, I rise to speak in support of the Customs and Border Protection Hiring and Retention, or the CBP HiRe Act. In recent years, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, has had a lot of trouble hiring and recruiting and retaining personnel to adequately staff the border and our ports of entry. Today, CBP is nearly 1,000 officers below the mandated staffing levels. That's 1,000 officers below the mandated staffing levels. And the Border Patrol, whose duty it is to secure 6,000 miles of borderlands, it suffers from a shortage of more than 1,800 agents. Again, the Border Patrol has a shortage of more than 1,800 agents. These shortages persist despite ample backing and funding from Congress and the threat they pose to both national security and these trade-reliant communities and economies, particularly like in my state of Arizona. This has been frustrating for border communities across the country, but it's especially problematic for Arizona, a state that depends on both border security and a lot of cross-border trade. For example, the Nogales port of entry in southern Arizona is one of the busiest ports in the nation. It processes approximately $2.5 billion worth of produce each year. Arizona alone has about $15 billion in trade with Mexico alone every year. Mexican shoppers spend about $8 million in stores in Arizona every day. Now, however, the port currently is suffering from a 23% shortage of CBP officers. Our ports cannot effectively and efficiently facilitate the flow of commerce across the border without adequate staffing. And one of the biggest challenges in both retaining and hiring new officers and agents for frontline positions has been the remoteness of these CBP installations. CBP officers and border agents are often stationed in geographically remote and isolated locations. This likely contributes to the fact that of those leaving the agency, so for those who leave the agency, nearly 30% of Border Patrol agents and over 10% of CBP officers are lost to other agencies. 30% of Border Patrol agents and over 10% of CBP officers are lost to other agencies. Now, massive staffing shortages aside, the CBP is barely able to hire fast enough to fill the jobs left by departing agents and officers. So we have great needs that are not being filled, but we also have attrition that we simply can't replace. In fact, CBP hires only 1 out of every 64 applicants for officer positions and 1 out of every 113 applicants for Border Patrol agent positions. This means that less than 2% of applicants managed to get through CBP's hiring process. The situation at CBP today is simply unsustainable. Now, Congress can't sit idly by as slow hiring rates and accelerating attrition threaten the security of our borders and the underpinnings of our economy. To that end, I'm pleased to introduce my CBP HiRe Act with Senator Heitkamp from North Dakota. This legislation would streamline the hiring process and allow the CBP to finally bring more agents and officers into frontline positions. Now, importantly, this bill gives CBP new tools to recruit and retain personnel in remote and hard-to-fill locations. This includes special salary rates and recruitment, relocation, and retention incentives. In addition, the bill will eliminate bureaucratic red tape by giving CBP the authority to use direct hire authority and to expedite the hiring of qualified applicants. Right now, the situation is that they have to deal with other federal agencies and get virtually every incentive and program that they want to approve and need to approve to hire more officers. They have to run it up the flagpole so many times with the federal agencies that it just simply takes too long. Lastly, the bill prevents CBP from disclosing an applicant's polygraph results with another federal agency or non-federal employer. Now, challenges relating to the administering of the polygraph have resulted in approximately 65% of individuals failing the test. If you think about that, if you have people who are in another law enforcement position, even those who have taken a polygraph before, just a year or two prior, many of them fear that a false positive on a polygraph exam might impact their ability to move to another federal agency, and if that is disclosed. And so if you have the polygraph, which can't be used in courts of law because it's not perfect or nowhere near perfect, then federal agencies shouldn't be able to forward that to other federal agencies. It acts as a big disincentive for people to apply for these positions because a false positive on a polygraph exam might imperil their chances to work for another federal agency or to work in law enforcement later in their career. This creates also a disincentive, as I mentioned, for individuals to want to be hired by CBP. In Arizona, safety and prosperity are inextricably linked to CBP's ability to secure the border and to facilitate trade. This act, the CBP HiRe Act, will give CBP the tools and the flexibility necessary to accomplish these missions. I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan solution. I look forward to seeing it move through the Senate without delay. And with that, Mr. President, I yield back.